This is CBN News Watch.
Thanks for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Gary Lane. We begin this half hour in the Middle East. Israel's military is poised to enter into Rafah, the last major stronghold of Hamas, even without a deal for the release of the hostages. But as Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Hamas still wants to continue negotiations to end the war.
Israeli troops and tanks continue to gather near Rafah for an expected military operation. Rafah is where many believe the leaders of Hamas are hiding, as well as the remaining battalions of Hamas fighters. It's also thought to be the location of the last remaining hostages. While Hamas seems to reject the latest ceasefire offer, it apparently wants negotiations to continue, a tactic that could be intended to forestall the IDF's invasion. But Israel's prime minister says they will move ahead with their plans for an assault.
We will do what is necessary in order to win and overcome our enemies, including in Rafah, in order to secure our future.
Two top Hamas demands are that Israel ends the war against the terrorist group and that all Israeli troops leave the Gaza Strip. But Netanyahu told visiting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken a deal to end the war without defeating Hamas is a non-starter. Meanwhile, along the northern border, negotiations to broker a peace between Hezbollah and Israel appear stalled. In light of that, Israel's military chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, told commanders Israel is getting ready for an attack on Hezbollah.
You are doing an excellent job of operational defense in the north, and now we are preparing for an offensive operation as well.
Samer Jijia, a prominent Christian politician in Lebanon, says Hezbollah constant attacks on Israel since October 7th are hurting Lebanon more than Israel. The tit-for-tat shellings and bombings have killed 22 Israelis, but the death toll is much higher in Lebanon itself, more than 350. Jijia says Hezbollah should pull all its militia forces away from the Lebanese border with Israel. In a major economic development, Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, slammed Turkey's President Erdogan after Turkey announced it's stopping all trade with Israel and banning all imports and exports because of the war in Gaza. Katz said this is how a dictator behaves, by ignoring international trade agreements. Turkey is a top trading partner with Israel. Despite some international opposition to Israel, Christians are showing they stand by the Jewish state this weekend with what's called Solidarity Sunday. As part of that, Bishop Robert Stern's group, Eagle's Wings, is bringing Israeli survivors of October 7th to talk to American church congregations.
So American Christians are going to have not only the opportunity, but the responsibility this coming Sunday, Solidarity Sunday, to hear from these survivors firsthand.
Stern says America faces the same battle as Israel.
The battle that Israel is facing is a battle for modern Western democratic values, and all of us have to wake up and understand they're on the front lines, but this battle affects all of us.
CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, while it seems unlikely, what happens if Hamas accepts this current proposal?
Well, that would put Israel in a bind right now. You know, although Netanyahu said that he's going to go into Rafah whether Hamas accepts this deal or not, it seems quite clear, Gary, that Hamas is really trying to delay what's going on. They know that if Israel goes into Rafah, that's where their last battalions are. That's where the leaders are, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif. That's where the hostages are. That if they go in there and defeat Hamas, the war's over. But right now, if they can delay and even prevent Israel from going into Rafah, they can claim victory. They could survive. They could probably, actually revive themselves to some places inside Gaza. So it remains to be seen exactly what's going to happen. Really, Gary, we've been having this sort of what's going to happen for days now. But we'll see what happens as soon as Israel either goes into Rafah or there could be a deal.
And Chris, Turkey's President Erdogan says his country is stopping all trade with Israel and banning imports and exports due to the war. So what are the consequences of that? And could that lead to potential trouble between Turkey and Israel?
Well, certainly the economic consequences are there, Gary. There's about over $6 billion in trade between Israel and Turkey last year in 2023. But actually, there's been trouble brewing with Turkey and Israel ever since the beginning of the war. Erdogan is calling it a genocide in Gaza. He's calling Netanyahu a dictator. And actually, so he's hosting many of the members of the Muslim Brotherhood as well. You saw in our video report, one of the leaders of Hamas was there with Erdogan. So he's a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is part of Hamas. So this brewing tension between Israel and Turkey has been going on for a long time, or ever since the beginning of the war. And I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon.
And Chris, many people here in the United States know that Sunday is Cinco de Mayo. They're probably unaware that it's Solidarity Sunday that's happening. So tell us more about Solidarity Sunday.
Yeah. Well, you saw that Bishop Robert Stearns is part of this. If people want to know more about it, they can go to solidaritySundayEvent.com. It's going to be held in 7 venues around the country, from California all the way to New York. And each of these venues is going to broadcast in its region. And what it does is it gives an opportunity for Christians to hear firsthand what happened on October 7th. You know, Gary, it really seems like with the protests on the college campuses, much of the media, it's been drowned out what actually happened on October 7th and the reason for this war in the very place. So that's a way that Christians can hear firsthand what happened on October 7th, why this war is being prosecuted, and why it's so important for Christians in the West to understand what's happening. Because as Robert Stearns said there in our report, you know, the sense is here in Israel, we're on the tip of the spear. We're really fighting for the West because Islamic Jihad is not only coming here in Israel, but to the West as well.
Okay, Chris, so what can we expect quickly on tonight's Jerusalem Dateline?
Well, we're going to have an update story on the latest here in Israel. We're going to have a story about who's behind these campus protests. I know, Gary, you've done some investigations about this as well. Much of the money coming from nations like Qatar. So we'll have a story on that. We'll have a story from Poland about the Holocaust, and that's a very timely story right now because the same anti-Semitism that exploded in the 1930s seems to be exploding here, not only in college campuses, but around the world. Finally, we're going to have a message by Cindy Jacobs. She's talking about how Christians need to pray for what's happening in the college campuses around the world and here in Israel.
Okay, Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem. Thank you, Chris, as always, for your insights. Stay safe. We know many people are praying for you and the staff there in Israel. And you can see the latest Jerusalem Dateline. That's tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8 Eastern. You can also watch it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. Well, police have arrested nearly 2,200 people during pro-Palestinian protests in recent weeks. And as the violence has spread during some of the protests, President Biden spoke out against it after being criticized by Republicans for staying silent. The president's remarks and the ongoing protests coming as collegiate graduation ceremonies begin this weekend. Brody Carter has that story.
We've all seen the images. It's against the law when violence occurs.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
President Biden breaking days of silence after scenes like these unraveled across campuses over the Israel-Gaza war.
Breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
They won't stop at anything short of divestment. And what divestment means is any company doing business in Israel, especially with the Israeli government. So that includes companies like, Alphabet and Amazon who have deals in Israel. It includes companies like Airbnb, who's, they host homes that are in settlements in the West Bank.
Until these demands are met, we do not have any plans of leaving.
While many demonstrations began peacefully, the tone quickly escalated. At Columbia University, police stormed a university building occupied by protesters, arresting nearly 300. In California, authorities disbanded a UCLA encampment after arresting at least 200 protesters. And in D.C., CBN's Tara Mergener saw a somewhat more peaceful scene at George Washington University.
Behind me, you can hear protesters shouting from the metal barricades they tore down and then placed the Palestinian flag on top. All around are dozens of tents with both students and non-students camping out around the clock.
You know, images on their shirts and yelling the chants, death to Jews, all of that. I mean, that's clearly anti-Semitism.
Northwestern University grad student Susan Radoff represents at least 300 Jewish students in the Kellogg School of Management.
And so it's really quite shocking to see these kids and a lot of adults too, community members, trying to make this a very black and white issue, act like experts on the issue when they're not, and then virtue signal to others and shame others who are not with them. I've heard of friendships that have been broken over this.
All of this played out as bipartisan lawmakers passed the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act Thursday, securing stronger protection for Jewish students subject to harassment, intimidation, and violence.
There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students.
UCLA has canceled its graduation ceremony due to campus protests, while several others are considering similar measures due to safety concerns. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Coming up, who's behind the protests? See why some observers believe they are organized. Stay with us. You're watching CBN News Watch. Welcome back to CBN News Watch. The protests broke out on dozens of college campuses in a matter of weeks. Some observers say they appear too organized and too well funded to be spontaneous. CBN's Chris Mitchell examines who might be playing a role behind the scenes.
Being a Jewish student at the University of Michigan right now, it's definitely a scary and uncomfortable time. There's a lot of anti-Semitism on our campus, and it's extremely unsettling.
Jack Landstein describes what it's becoming like to be a Jewish student at the University of Michigan.
Intifada, intifada. So it's a lot of chants from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, intifada, intifada. Bullhorns going through the school of business, going through the undergraduate library, making it very challenging for students to do work and focus. I sometimes am wary about wearing my Star of David outside of my shirt.
Landstein is not alone.
What they're doing is they're very clearly signaling to Jewish students that they're not welcome on campus, that they're not being protected by the university leaders in a way that they would protect any other group on campus.
Dr. Jay Green, educational policy expert at the Heritage Foundation, tells CBN News he sees clues pointing to a more professional, organized effort behind these protests.
We only get little hints of it, and the hints are that the funders include the Soros Open Society Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and there are also some links to foreign organizations as well. We've seen that people linked to foreign organizations have been involved in trainings and that there are shared talking points and documents as well. So it's pretty clear that this is an externally funded and organized effort.
Green also finds familiar strategies recurring across the various campuses.
Among the common signs are that they're determined to set up camps so that it's more difficult to remove them, that they never have to leave them. That's one sign. The second sign is that they're setting up in the middle of public spaces within the university so that it is difficult for people to get to and from work, to and from classes without having to go through these protests. So they're effectively shutting down the normal operations of these universities.
Green's also observed a strong Middle East connection.
We've seen people from the Middle East come and provide trainings to them. And the biggest connection that we might identify between the Middle East and these protests is the very large number of Middle East students who are involved in them.
While polls show most Americans don't support the demonstrations, protesters are getting positive reinforcement elsewhere. Iran's foreign ministry condemns reports of protesters being arrested, although the Islamic regime has traditionally arrested, imprisoned, and even killed student protesters within its borders.
The Islamic Republic of Iran's foreign ministry in no way accepts violent and militarized response to students and their demands in Americans' universities. It rejects this approach and deems it concerning. It's necessary that the international community takes notice of this issue.
On social media, Hamas has praised the protest while warning the Biden administration. As this movement is expected to continue, Green expects protests will likely disrupt commencement ceremonies and believes many protesters will expand beyond college campuses to gather in Chicago at the August Democratic National Convention. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, the global population is going to shrink for the first time since the bubonic plague. See why some are calling this the most important story of our lifetime. Welcome back to CBN Newswatch. The world is facing a population crisis. Experts predict the number of people on the planet could begin to shrink in the next 30 years. They also warn that it's likely to create serious economic and social problems. Dale Hurd shows us their predictions are dire.
Empty playgrounds, schools without enough students to stay open, small towns deserted and abandoned. This is not some dystopian vision of the future. Demographers warn this is our future. Global population growth is leveling off, and by the second half of this century could begin to shrink for the first time since the bubonic plague struck the world almost 700 years ago.
Everything that we understand that functions in our societies today that depends on people, which is almost everything, is going to change.
Stephen J. Shaw is a data scientist, demographer, and producer of the film Birth Gap. He spoke to us from his home in Japan, one of the nations at the forefront of this global demographic collapse. Shaw told us he made the documentary mostly out of fear.
Fear of the future that we're, as a planet, completely unprepared for and mostly unaware of.
The population crisis could be the most important story of our time because of all the changes and potential problems that it will bring to our world. Taxes could soar as economies shrink. The many elderly could cause retirement and medical systems to collapse. Businesses will struggle to find employees, and there won't be enough young to care for the old.
That means sporadically you're going to have housing that's left desolated. You're going to have stores that are empty. You're going to have places with fewer and fewer employees, fewer customers. You're talking of decimations of communities. You're talking of closed schools. You're talking of closed hospitals.
A nation needs an average fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman to keep its population from shrinking. The countries on this map in some shade of blue all fall below that replacement rate. They include 70% of the global population in almost every developed nation. The U.S. fertility rate hit a new record low last year, dropping to 1.62 births per woman, a number temporarily offset by record numbers of illegal immigrants. In his film, Shaw explains how fewer children from fewer and fewer mothers creates a cascading effect, leading to a downward spiral from which Shaw says no known civilization has ever recovered.
This thing is going to be like a snowball rolling downhill. It's just going to keep building.
Daryl Bricker is global CEO of the polling firm Ipsos Public Affairs and co-author of Empty Planet, The Shock of Global Population Decline.
The top reason for people not having children is they just don't want them. That's the main reason people are not having children. The second reason tends to be related to their ability to have children, whether it's the relationship that they're in or the personal circumstances they find themselves in, or their physical ability to have children.
Shaw calls it unplanned childlessness, linked to delayed parenthood.
People trying or wanting to start families well into their 30s, when frankly biology isn't going to help necessarily. Biological challenges start around that time, but there's a bigger problem. Often people looking to start families in the 30s aren't in stable relationships. they've gone through a breakup, they don't have a partner, their partner's not on the right page at the right time. It doesn't get easier to find that magical moment.
Government incentive programs to encourage larger families have seen only limited success. Shaw warns that nations with the lowest fertility rates could see their populations cut in half in as few as 2 generations. Most of our lives, we've been told how the world faces dangerous overpopulation.
If the present trends continue, our cities are going to be choked with people. They're going to be choked with traffic. They're going to be choked with crime. They're going to be choked with pollution. And they will be impossible places in which to live, and the explosions will be even worse.
So people stopped having enough children. And now this widening birth gap could be the most important social and political event in modern history.
The first message I would give to anybody is wake up. This is going to be one of the dominant issues, if not the dominant issue, through the course of the 21st century.
We've gotten used to this idea that things generally get better, but all of that relies on certain things being in place. It's not like population is going to glide down to some wonderful lower number. No, it's ugly, but also because there's no known solution. No society's ever come out of this.
The future doesn't have to look like this. But Shaw said we've got to start talking about it. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, see how one school bus driver is going to the extra mile to help his students. Stay with us. Welcome back to CBN Newswatch. Going the extra mile to encourage students. That's a mission of Anthony Burgess. He's a school bus driver in Florida's Pinellas County, who considers himself an educator and a mentor. Burgess encourages the students who ride his bus to create positive messages to encourage other riders. Students say it makes a big difference to read things like, if you can dream it, you can do it. And don't let the anxiety monster control you. He hopes the notes can change at least one person's day. Well, that's it today for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more on our CBN News programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And we hope you'll join us next time. So have a great day.